Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is Corporal Speculation, and today I'm here to talk a little bit about Venezuela and the emerging conflict over there, which, just full disclosure where I'm at, I am a combat veteran. I've been on 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, and I generally, like most combat veterans, am a libertarian. I don't think that these conflicts are a good idea. And hopefully I can make a persuasive case for why I think we really don't need to be involved in this. But first, a quick history lesson. Venezuela was an oil-rich South American country, was the gem of South America, best living standards, kind of like a South American Saudi Arabia, but a communist took over. His name was Hugo Chavez in 1999. He nationalized the oil industry and kicked all the American companies out and began running, the entire oil sector of his economy through the state in order to fund welfare programs for the people of Venezuela. At the time, people like Bernie Sanders really applauded the move. He's on the record for that. And I'm no fan of communists. I definitely, democratic socialists scare me. I'd love to see, if there's any democratic socialists listening, I'm just curious how this situation could be avoided, what happened in Venezuela, with that ideology, because I've never really heard it well explained. And, if you listen to people that run today under that platform, they do sound like Hugo Chavez. I know they don't advocate violence, but he didn't either before he took power. It wasn't until afterwards. But so he took control over the oil industry, kicked the American companies out. That's kind of the arch lesson, or the start of the beef between the United States and Venezuela that's been going ever since. And Hugo Chavez ran the country and ran the oil industry very poorly. That just happens when the state runs anything, and it collapsed, and he was unable to continue to create product, and the entire country collapsed because it was so dependent on that sector. It just hollowed out the company over and over again, made sure it was completely staffed with loyalists, and friends of the government, ran every aspect, but they didn't know how to run an oil company. So the entire thing ended up collapsing. And so, you flash forward till today, and what used to be the gem of, South America, is completely collapsed in on itself, and is just a hellscape. But that doesn't mean that we should invade, So in 2013, Hugo Chavez died, and Nicolas Maduro took over, and he's been running it ever since. And in Trump's first administration, the opposition party had, made some ground, had some traction, and we had a similar conversation about whether or not it was worth going in there and kicking Maduro out. It kind of puttered out. I think that's for the best. And hopefully this one does as well, because we're back in a similar situation. We've got somebody over there that we want to put in power instead of Maduro. But, if it's going to be an actual invasion, it just never works out. Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam have all been catastrophes, and we just don't need another one of those. But as it sits right now, we've got some warships parked outside of Venezuela, and we've blown up 4 boats, killed scores of drug traffickers. And listen, I'm no friend of drug traffickers. I definitely think that we absolutely need to do something about the fentanyl situation. But I don't know if anybody really buys that that's what this war is about. It's the second time they tried to launch it for completely different pretexts. And Venezuela just isn't a big contributor to, the heroin market or the fentanyl market. It's coming from China, it's coming from Mexico. Venezuela is a small player in that. It's clearly just that original beef, and we're looking for a reason to go in and kick over their house. And that's going to create mass immigration. Some of those migrants will go to Colombia. They'll get washed with socialist Venezuelans, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and up to us. We're going to end up with a ton of them here too. And it's like, Do you think that really mitigates the drug issue? I think that this would clearly exacerbate the problem, because you're going to have more desperate people, and desperate people often do get involved in the drug trade because it's a good way to make good money very quickly without any kind of qualifications. You're just participating in the black market. So I think it's a terrible idea on that front. But even more so, without talking too much about the drug stuff, because again, I just think that's a pretext, and pretty much everybody sees through it. I don't really think there's a ton of people watching this video that really believe that that's why. And maybe you were curious as to why, and the reason is because we don't want a Chinese Russian satellite state so close to us, and we're still bitter that they kicked out all the Western interests that ran their oil industry, and they tore down their economy. And so, we want to get in there, and we want to get somebody new in charge, get some fresh blood, and it would be wonderful if it happened on its own, if there was a revolution and they put, somebody in charge like Javier Milei over in Argentina. Nobody would be happier than me. But when you do it through a military intervention, I've been there. I've been that guy. I've been on the front line of it. People rally around the flag. You don't even know the language. You're just walking around their country with an M16 and body armor on. I was 19 years old. I didn't care. I wanted to go home. And if you think that that's the situation that's going to bring in democracy and forward-thinking capitalist markets, it's it's just not going to work that way. So I think Maduro or Donald Trump said that Maduro offered him everything in order to not get invaded. Kind of a similar situation to Saddam, and we saw how the Iraq war went. I think we should take him up on it. Honestly, I think that we should do everything we can to, make it profitable for the American people and the American economy, to get that oil up out of the ground, not be so dependent on, Russian, Iranian, Saudi Arabian oil, and get another source of oil pumping into the global economy, help build Venezuela up, and help them out, and then maybe through soft policy, they'll moderate and have some elections. I imagine Maduro's probably sick of holding power, but just doesn't want to get Gaddafi'd, and Gaddafi was a dictator of Libya who gave up its nuclear weapons at George Bush's request, and then Obama and the UN carpet bombed this country, ended up getting sodomized to death with a AK-47. So, you could see how you would do everything in your power to avoid that fate. I would. So it makes sense. But overall, I think that that's kind of the situation. And, I just really hope that calmer heads prevail here and that we don't send in the Marines. I know I personally, what are we even talking about? Like, how many 18-year-old red-blooded Americans are you willing to trade to get Nicolas Maduro out of power in Venezuela? Is this really an issue that the United States needs to be concerning itself with? Is this really a good use of our blood and treasure? Who cares who runs Venezuela? It just makes no sense to have these kids go over there and try and overthrow them. There's going to be a rally effect. All the communists from around South America are going to flood there to fight us. It'll be bloody, it'll be nasty, and it's totally unnecessary. We just need to not participate in that kind of thing, and look back. Look what happened in Afghanistan. We fought a 20-year war. We got in bed with drug runners. Before we invaded, Afghanistan produced no heroin. While we occupied, Afghanistan produced 99% of the heroin that the entire world consumed, a surplus, more heroin than the world even needed. And then once we left, the heroin supply completely dried up, so you want a war on drugs, don't go in there and participate in that type of thing. And then, the narcotics trade will dry up on its own. Hopefully. Fentanyl is its own thing that they can manufacture easily, so it's much harder now. But it's just tough to paint the counterfactual on how things could be different, Iraq was a great foil to Iran. It was a Sunni-run state. The Sunnis are, aligned with Saudi Arabia as a Sunni-run state. It's the Sunni bloc with Egypt and Jordan. And, Iraq could have easily slotted into that Gulf state alliance and be an oil producer and be a big check on Iranian power, but instead we went in there and we kicked over and executed Saddam, and the Shias took over, and now Iraq is a puppet state to Iran. It's just clearly not in our interest. It didn't work out. Nobody said that was going to happen. Nobody wanted that to happen. But sometimes war goes sideways. Every time war goes sideways. Having a plan is great until you meet enemy action. We always used to say that in the Marine Corps. And then things happen the way they happen. And the Iraq War, the way it went down, we lost it. We had to leave. And we took a country that would have been an ally now and turned them into an enemy and an Iranian puppet. That's the type of thing that can happen. And then Vietnam. They're a great trading ally to us now. That whole war was for nothing. We lost, and then they came around to our side anyway. So, common sense says that if we had just let the situation play out, they would have come around to our way of thinking regardless eventually, and they would just have a way bigger population that they could produce goods with and be a good ally with. Maybe at this point they would be something comparable to Japan and South Korea, even if they were just 60% of that. Having all three of those countries as great allies in Asia would be a fantastic check to China, but instead we went in there, we spent $1 trillion in Vietnam, 2.5 trillion in Iraq, 2 trillion in Afghanistan over 20 years. Trillions of dollars, going to spend trillions more on veteran benefits. I watched people die. For what? For no reason, and it happened. It's unfortunate. I hate it. I would love for, me to be venerated like a World War II vet as being an Afghanistan vet. But that's not the reality, and it's unfortunate. But we can learn from our mistakes, and we cannot do this again. We just need to take a break. We need to focus on our country. Why would we spend, trillions of dollars in Venezuela overthrowing their government when they're already offering us everything from the offset? We should just take that, work on getting the oil up out of the ground, and then be done with it. But that's all I got on Venezuela. Hopefully you found this helpful, and again, kind of a unique perspective of a combat veteran. And hopefully this one just kind of blows over like it did last time, and we don't end up with a war in Venezuela, because it's been a catastrophe every other time, and I see no reason to think that this one won't be.